Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Girl in Love with Tech podcast. My name is Rachel Irabor. I'm a Microsoft Learn student ambassador, a Power Platform developer, and a Dynamics 365 CRM developer. And this podcast is broadcasted live on Twitter, LinkedIn, and also my YouTube channel. So follow me everywhere. Yeah. And today we are going to be talking about ALM, which is application lifestyle management on and deployment, DevOps in Microsoft Power Platform. And our special guest today is Parvez. We have been we have been talking on Twitter, and we also saw in South Coast Summit, yeah, which was in Farnborough. Hi, Parvez.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be here. I've seen some of the episodes, your most recent episodes on the podcast, and you've spoken to some amazing legends from the community here. So it's an honor to be on the same stage here and talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for accepting my invite. And please, if you can introduce yourself so that we can know more about you.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Parvez Ghumra. I am based here in the UK. So I traditionally came from a .NET bespoke development background, mainly doing web-based development using the Microsoft .NET framework
Yeah.
when I came out of university, actually. Um, I actually did that for a couple of years, and then I landed in development for Dynamics CRM. It was version 4 at the time, working for a small partner here in the UK. That was
Yeah.
back in 2010, and that
Well,
happened by accident actually.
yeah.
And I basically stayed with the same product since then, every version of it since then,
Yeah.
right through to the present day, as we know it, Microsoft Power Platform,
Yeah.
Dataverse development. So day to day, I'm doing pretty much senior and lead development, kind of technical architecture, design,
Okay.
and more recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, my focus has just shifted to ALM and deployment
Yeah.
for Power Platform applications.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that sometimes I actually ask questions on the Power Platform community, and you always ask me my questions. I'm like, okay, we need to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, I'm recently trying to become more and more active in the community. I think
Yeah.
over time, I've benefited from the community
Yeah.
contributions people have made over a long period of time. So it was about time I started paying that back now, and I'm just it's an honor to be helping people out. As I
Yeah.
say, on the WhatsApp community groups and on the forums and stuff as well. I've recently started blogging as well, so you might have seen
Yeah.
some of my posts on there.
Yeah. It's amazing. I see your post a lot. Yeah. It's amazing.
Thank you, thank
Yeah.
you.
So for our listeners, maybe this is the first time they're hearing about Power Platform and they want to know what Power Platform is. So what is Power Platform to you?
Okay, so I would define it as Microsoft's a platform that helps organizations realize their business transformation goals in terms of technology.
Yeah.
So there are tools within the platform which help organizations build applications, automate the business processes, build reports, build integrations, and a whole lot more. And all of this using low code technology, but also bringing together, uh, people and professionals with different skill sets. People who are not traditional developers, people who do
Yeah.
have experience with
True.
developers, and kind of bringing those together in what they call fusion teams.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what Power Platform is all about. Is it's all about kind of empowering people who don't have traditional software development skills to
Yeah.
build applications and build systems and software systems that help organizations.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, platform is amazing. The ecosystem, like being able to create that opportunity where you don't have to be a traditional developer in order to build solutions. So, and I think the most amazing part of it too is that even with being a developer, you can also work with Microsoft Power Platform. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
as I said, there's a space for everybody.
yeah,
Um,
everybody.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So the area we're going to be talking about today is on deployments, because this, I think, is a very essential skill that most persons are not aware of. That because I think most with deployments, let me say, moving of solutions or applications, workflows from one environment to another, people sometimes they do it manually. They have to export and then move it to the next environment. Yeah.
Mhm.
Or most persons are not aware of those things. They are not aware that, okay, I can do this, I can do that. So that's what we are going to be discussing about today. So what is ALM?
Okay, so it's good that you're asking me today, because I actually did a virtual session on this on Wednesday
Yeah,
this week. There's a recording for it, so
yeah,
to all the listeners, do go and check it out on YouTube.
yeah.
But
And
basically,
you can
ALM.
get, if you can get the link too, that would be nice.
Yeah, yeah, I'll post it. I'll post it out. But yeah, ALM for me basically
Yeah,
is it's a combination of people, process, tools, and technology, combining all of those to manage and facilitate the delivery of software effectively. So what that means in real terms is, those of us who have been involved in software delivery for some time will know your typical life cycle of building software in terms
yeah,
of planning out the requirements, designing it, building it, testing it,
yeah,
deploying it, and then monitoring and learning from the operational use of it in the production
okay,
environment, and then
yeah,
proceeding through that cyclic process over a period of time. And over that period, your application matures. So that entire process end to end is what
yeah,
ALM is really about. Now you mentioned the movement of solutions between
yeah,
environments.
yeah.
That is an important part, but I would say ALM is a much broader topic, and
Okay,
not just the movement of solutions.
okay,
So that session I presented on Wednesday this week, it's covered all of the little
yeah,
characteristics of an ALM strategy, which I think are important in terms of defining that strategy and delivering software applications.
okay,
But yeah, that piece about moving solutions is
yeah.
also critical. It's not to undermine the importance of that.
Yeah, I think concerning the moving of environment, like for people who are just starting their journey in Power Platform, and maybe they are the only person who has a Power Platform role in their company, they are not aware about creating environment for production, creating environment for testing, create environment for development. They are just working on just one particular environment, just doing everything on one particular environment. So these are the few informations to actually learn about. And from the community, there are so many resources online on how this works. So you just have to dive into it. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And when we are talking about DevOps, because today the topic is ALM and DevOps. So what is DevOps? And obviously we are coming into Azure DevOps too.
Yeah. So I mean, for me personally,
Yeah.
I've never really explored the differences in detail between DevOps and ALM. A lot of people use the terms very interchangeably. I think
Yeah.
DevOps is just, I would say, is just a modern way of saying ALM. Really, it means the same thing. But when you talk about Azure DevOps, obviously that's Microsoft's platform,
Yeah.
an encompassing platform, which allows you to bring together the whole ALM story for software delivery, and it's not
Yeah.
just for Power Platform. It allows you to build software and deliver software for a number of different technologies.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this podcast, if you have any question that you love to ask, you can just drop your question on the comment section. Yeah. Thank you. So one question I would love to ask you is like, what is the benefits of Azure DevOps to Microsoft Power Platform? Yeah.
So I would say it's because it's an all-encompassing a platform for DevOps or ALM.
Yeah.
It really brings things that are important in terms of software delivery. So there are things like source control,
Yeah.
quality control measures that you can integrate into an overall ALM strategy. So Azure DevOps really brings together all of that under a single process in terms
Yeah.
of build and release automation as well. So
Yeah.
if you were doing manual deployment, say as an example,
Yeah.
from your dev environment into test production and so on,
Yeah.
um, you have to manage all of that manually outside of any kind of central system. So you
Okay.
don't know, as an example, one of the disadvantages of that, you don't know what's changing between version 1 and version 2 in your
Yeah.
solution. You don't
Okay.
have that granular level of understanding what those differences are.
Okay.
If you implement a robust source control system as part of your ALM strategy, you've got a very nice, easy way of seeing exactly what's changed between version 1 and version 2,
Yeah.
why it's changed in terms of relationships to work items and user stories, who
Okay.
made the changes and when they
Yeah.
made those changes. So you've
Yeah.
got that complete traceability across the board, really, and you
Yeah.
can view those differences both from the user story side in Azure DevOps
Yeah.
on your
Sure.
boards, as well as when you are reviewing a particular build or release to go into a particular environment.
Yeah.
So before you hit that approve button into a
Yeah.
release, you can see which work items are actually included in the changes in that build. So
Yeah.
it gives you full control over what's changed, and that's just one benefit. There's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
One of the other great things I like about it is the fact that you can integrate quality control measures into
Okay.
your build and your release process. So, for
Yeah.
example, if you've written some unit tests or
Yeah.
so automated UI tests, you can
Yes.
integrate the execution of those as part of your build and release process automatically. And then, if there are any failures or issues that come out of that, they can
Yeah.
be flagged as failures of the build. So you're
Yeah.
trapping those sorts of issues very
Yeah.
early before a particular
It
build even
happens.
goes into a production environment. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
about catching all of those issues first and making sure that quality is really, top level before any particular build goes into your target environment.
Yeah, I think there's something I learned recently. I just joined, like, I just started learning about deployments with Azure DevOps and stuff like that. It's really fun. It's a lot to learn and process. It's a lot to learn and process. But I think the most thing I love about it, like the explanation you just talked about now, you have the history of everything that's happening. There's
Yeah.
collaboration. You get
Yeah.
to see the board, you see what is happening, which person is assigned that particular task. You see
Yeah.
if that task is completed, if it's still active, and so many other things. And you also see the dashboard of everything that is happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah,
It's really,
it's
really
as I say,
amazing.
it's all encompassing. I mean, even after a deployment into a test environment, you know,
Yeah.
your quality assurance team will be going through test cycles, and
Yeah.
the test plans they write, the test scripts they write, the bugs they raise as
Yeah.
part of the execution of those scripts. All of that is within Azure DevOps. So you've got
Yeah.
everything under a single platform, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. And if you are listening to this, I'm just going to check the comments. Okay. So if you're listening to this, you just have to check on Azure DevOps. It's really, really important and it's amazing. I think another amazing part of it is that it's not just the building part of it, but the business side of it. Maybe you're working on a project for a particular business or your clients. They get to see what is happening. They get to see the step-by-step process, everything that is happening. So yeah, it's really, really amazing.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad you bring that up because that's another
Yeah,
benefit. You can actually share some of the reports that you have in Azure DevOps with the client,
yeah,
so they can see, they can see on a burn down report as an example, when
yeah.
you've got story points assigned to user stories,
Okay.
is the team actually getting through those points, the story points, and delivering based on the requirements? And
Yeah,
you can surface all of those reports to your customer as well. So,
yeah,
yeah, as I say, it's a really, really
yeah.
powerful tool.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. And I think another part we need to talk about, it's we just need to talk about is very, very important. It's like how is the setting up? Now we are talking about Azure DevOps. We're talking about the benefits to both the developers and also to the business side. So how can one set up this? How can one set up these processes in Azure DevOps?
I think the key is planning. Planning is a
Yeah,
very important factor. Um, I mean, Azure DevOps, it's you can spin up an instance quite easily, but it's
yeah,
about making the instance and the organization, the configuration of it, make it work for your organization. So every organization is going to have a slightly different way of working in terms of
yeah.
development. What you can do in Azure DevOps is you can have templates, and
Okay.
if you install those, you get a bunch of features. For example, you may get additional fields on your user story definition,
Yeah.
and you can configure the different types of work items in Azure DevOps to work for you.
Okay.
So there was a discussion recently in the community, as an example.
Yeah.
I think it was Neil Benson put out a question. Do you? I think the question was around: do you assign? Would you like to assign multiple people to a user story? And
Yeah.
he started a discussion around that. And out of the box, I don't think Azure DevOps supports that at the moment.
No, no, it
Um,
doesn't.
so so there was a discussion around, if would you like the ability to do that? Personally, from my personal experience, what I've tended to do is the user story is always assigned to the person who owns that story at any
Okay.
point in time,
Yeah.
or the person who is responsible for the next action that's pending on that user story.
Okay.
And if there are more than one person working on that user story,
Yeah.
then that can potentially be broken down as tasks if it makes sense for the organization. And
Okay.
it doesn't make
Yeah,
sense for
true.
everyone.
You can break it to tax. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
True.
if there's a level of detail, a granular level of detail that you can add to the task which adds any value, then it makes sense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's probably no value in doing it. So the idea is
Yeah.
make it work for your organization, your team, because
Yeah.
it is very, very configurable.
Yeah, I think with even working with tax, you can actually connect that user story to the tax. Like,
Yeah.
especially, let me say, for instance, you are trying to understand what is happening on the project, and maybe you go to a particular tax and you're like, okay, where is this tax coming from? You can
Mhm.
easily see what user story that tax is coming from. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's amazing. Yeah.
really
And
amazing.
yeah, I think there's one question that I would love to ask. And that question is like, we're talking about pipelines, we're talking about we're talking about movement of solutions from one environment to another. So how does the pipeline, how does it work like? How does the setting up look like? Like, yeah,
So, yeah, I think when you talk about movement of solutions between environments, I think it's important to
yeah,
emphasize that if you want to get the most value out of your investment in ALM, you
yeah,
need to really break that process down a bit.
okay,
So it's not always as simple as moving a solution from environment A to environment B.
yeah,
I What I like to do is I'll break that process down into three distinct stages.
okay,
So the first of those stages would be exporting that solution out of the development environment,
okay,
unpacking it into its granular files,
okay,
using tools that are available, and
yeah,
committing those changes to source control. And
yeah,
that gives you the ability to track over a period of time effectively all the history of changes that have happened to each individual component. So
yeah,
if, for example, there's a table that's changing, a new column is being introduced, or
yeah. It
the
shows,
the
yeah,
form the form for a model-driven app is changing, you can
yeah,
see at the XML level for each individual line that's changed.
yeah,
So you are really bringing the benefits of source control there. So that's the
yeah,
first stage. Then the second stage is really about packaging up those files from source control and
okay,
rebuilding a solution, a solution that is managed for your non-development environments,
yeah,
and packaging that and building it, preparing it in a state that would then deploy to your target environments, and then
okay,
publishing that as a build artifact, so it's available
yeah,
centrally.
sure,
Okay, so that's the second stage. The final stage is then what you talk about, pushing that final solution into your target environment. So then
yeah.
that can go into your test environment or your production environment, whatever it may happen to be.
Yeah, I think there's one thing I love about when you're running a pipeline, you get to see like the full information of what is happening on the background. Like when you go to
Yeah,
the agent, when you go to the agents, you get to see everything that is happening. It's really, really
yeah,
amazing. Yeah, it's
yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah. Yeah,
And
the
yeah,
tool set has really come a long way in terms of the richness of what it can do. The
yeah,
Microsoft Power Platform build tools extension. There's a lot of community extensions as well. I think a
yeah.
lot of the UK-based partners have published their own extensions as well. I
That's
think
amazing.
HCL, Curve, CloudThing, and Capgemini. I've worked with theirs as well.
Yeah.
And even before Microsoft's version actually came out, there's been something called Power DevOps Tools,
Okay.
um, which has been built by an MVP called Weil Hamzy, and that's been around for a very long time, and
Yeah.
it's very, very rich in terms of what you can do with it. So I'd
Okay.
highly recommend checking that one out as well. But yeah, as you say, you can check exactly what it's doing at each step when you've got the tasks.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
understanding exactly what it's doing, committing to source control. You can explore all of the logs that it pushes out for you.
Yeah. It's amazing. And we have a question from the comment section. It said, how could you explain the difference between the DevOps pipeline versus managed pipelines deployments? And when will you use each of them?
Okay, so when they're saying managed pipelines, I'm assuming they're referring to the in-platform pipelines, the
Okay.
relatively new feature that's come about. So my understanding is the in-platform pipelines are still a fairly new capability, and
Okay.
they one of the things they require is your environment to be managed, and that
Yeah.
comes with its own set of requirements, or shall we say options. The Azure DevOps pipelines give you a lot more flexibility and control, but it means that you have to configure it manually, essentially. So you will
Yeah.
require an element of ALM and DevOps skills in the team to be able to do that. But
Okay.
ultimately, it gives you more control and flexibility, because what you can also do is, remember I said the ALM strategy, in my view, is not just about moving solutions.
Yeah.
You may have a number of different build artifacts that your application is dependent upon. For
Okay.
example, you may have reference data in Dataverse tables.
Yeah.
That I would consider also to be a build artifact, because you need to deploy it to your target environment in order for
Yeah.
your application to work correctly.
Yeah. That's
So
true. You
so
just
you
yeah.
so you need to treat it in the same way as any other component. You need to source control it, you need to build it, you need to deploy it.
Yeah.
And the in-platform pipelines don't have the ability, as far as I know, to deploy some of those other component types. They
Yeah.
deal with only a single Dataverse solution at a time. Even
Okay.
even implementing things like source control is something that you would have to configure separately if you were to use
Okay.
the in-platform pipelines. But having said that, even in Azure DevOps, if you were going down that route, you would still have to set all of that up as well. So there's a bit more investment that's required if you do it using Azure DevOps compared to
Yeah.
the in-platform pipelines. But that's I think where the in platform pipelines come into play is Microsoft are really selling that to the local, the citizen developer audience,
Okay.
where they don't already have an ALM capability in place, and
Yeah.
that's an option that would allow them to get set up quite quickly. And
Yeah.
but I would say it's probably only something you want to consider for simpler implementations. If you've got
Okay.
more complex and advanced requirements, then you need to really consider Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for the answer. I think there's something you just pointed out just now that I would love to ask you, which is connection references, especially for those who are just starting out, or maybe this is the first time they are being aware that okay, you can do deployments this way. So when we talk about connection references, it's kind of left out a bit because it's important when you're trying to deploy, especially when you have flows, especially when you have flows, you need connection references, which are from your service accounts. So
Yeah.
what do you say about connection references and also service accounts?
Yeah. So the ALM story for Power Automate Cloud Flows
Yeah,
has come quite a significant way since the early days. So what we have now is the ability, as you say, to have these connection references,
yeah,
which cloud flows are dependent upon. So for any service or connector that you're using from your cloud flows, will have an associated connection reference, and
okay,
your cloud flows will have dependencies on those connection references. Now, when you create a sorry when you create a connection in a target environment, that connection is only accessible to to the user that owns that connection. You can
okay,
share it with a service principal, but you can't share it with any other named user.
yeah,
So uh, I found from my experience that the in order to ensure a smooth deployment, you need to
yeah,
make sure that you have a valid connection for
okay,
each unique connector that you're using in each of
yeah,
your target environments. So if, for
yeah,
example, you're using a
yeah.
Dataverse connector,
That's very true. Yeah,
or the SharePoint connector, or I don't know, the Microsoft Forms connector, you need
yeah,
a connection using your deployment account in your target environment for each of those.
okay,
And if you've got your ALM strategy properly set up, what you can do is have a deployment settings file, which essentially tells the deployment process how to connect each connection reference to the correct connection. So
okay,
each connection will have a unique identifier which can tie it to the connection reference. It's a bit
yeah,
difficult to explain in a conversation like this, but
yeah,
maybe I'll do some a blog or some YouTube video on it at some point. But I mean,
yeah,
there are quite useful resources on there. I think Scott Duro, I think, has done a great blog on this topic, and so has Benedict Bergman and many others. So I think
yeah.
it's quite well documented.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think there's something we have been mentioning throughout on this podcast. But before then, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, wherever you're watching this right now, please just follow. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, my name is Rachel Irabor on YouTube. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Thank you. And the next question I have to ask you is that on ALM, we have been talking so much about ALM or referencing about it. So, for someone who is just maybe they're hearing it for the first time, I know you have explained about it, but can you talk a bit about it? Like, you talked about it not just being about deployment, not just being about moving solutions from one environment to another. So, what is it about?
It's really I think the process is really something that gives people who work in software delivery,
Yeah.
um, the objective of it is to give people more confidence about the software that's being delivered in
Okay.
terms of the quality, because you've already implemented all of those quality gates up front, and you've caught all your
Yeah.
issues early, and you resolve them. But also confidence over what's actually included in the build, because you've
Okay.
got the whole traceability of source control and your build, and then when you deploy that, it's about building that level of confidence.
Yeah.
So I think those should be the key drivers in implementing your ALM strategy.
Okay. I think we have a question from
Yeah.
Davy. So he said another question. I really like to see explained. If you deploy in production a solution using DevOps, what account or type do you recommend doing the import? Service principal or technical accounts? Looking to the ownership of the flows as a result of the account, creating them first.
Look into the ownership of the flows as a result of the account. Yeah. Okay. So I think I understand where this question is going. So from my experience, what works the most cleanest way is to have a licensed, what I call a service account.
Okay.
Technically, it's a generic named account which you set as for example, the password never expiring on that account because you're always going to be using it just for
Yeah.
deployment.
Okay.
But it'll still need to have all the necessary licenses applied. And if you obviously configure it using automatic deployments, you will make sure it's got the username and password stored securely and
Yeah.
not shared by many users.
Yeah.
So I think that's an approach that works fairly well in my experience. And what it means is that the components like Cloudflows are naturally owned by that service account as a result of the deployment.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be my
Okay.
recommendation.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to move to the next questions. So, what are the best practices for Azure DevOps, for Power Platform?
That's a good question. I think there's lots, and a lot of this comes down to planning and how you build and implement your ALM strategy and your process.
Yeah.
But one of the most important factors that I would probably emphasize at this point is organizing your solutions and your solution segmentation.
Okay.
Now, there's two key drivers that you need to think about when it comes to this particular thing. The first is organizing your solutions in a manner that ensures that they would deploy gracefully, whether that's a deployment to a brand new clean environment,
Yeah.
or whether that's an upgrade to one or more of those solutions in an environment where those solutions already exist or a prior
Okay.
version exists.
Yeah.
Um, Now, if you manage the dependencies across your baseline solutions very well, I
Okay.
think that puts you on the front foot immediately when it comes to deployment. But the
Okay.
other factor you need to think about is how do your developers and your makers interact with that baseline solution in your dev environment?
Yeah.
So if you're working in a shared development environment, as an example,
Okay.
and you only have a single solution which contains all of your customizations in,
Yeah.
uh, you're gonna run into problems when the time comes for each developer and your maker, especially if you've got a big team.
Yeah.
When each of those complete their respective tasks and are ready to commit those changes to source control, they may
Okay.
finish at a different time because a plugin, as an example, takes a
Yeah.
lot longer to build and unit test compared to, say, a table or a form in a
Yes.
model-driven app.
Sure.
So you need to think carefully about how is your solution organization, your separation of solutions, how is that going to facilitate your developers and your makers?
Yeah.
So try to baseline your solutions in a manner that prevents your developers and your makers from treading on each other's toes and getting in each other's way.
Yeah.
And especially if you're working in a shared development environment, how do you manage those dependencies? So in my current client, what we've got at the moment is we've got a dedicated Teams channel to do
Okay.
all of that coordination, and because we're working in shared development environments, so
Yeah.
at any point in time, each developer knows what other developers are working on, which components they are changing. So it
Okay.
means that we're not overwriting each other's changes. We know
Yeah.
which
True. That's
story
very
each one
important.
is
Yeah.
working on, and also ensures that we don't create deployment dependency issues for each other.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a lot of careful planning. I'd say that's one of the best practices I would recommend.
Yeah, I think there's one thing too that's very important too, documentation, a well detailed documentation that even when you're no longer, maybe another person is viewing a user story, another person is maybe viewing a wiki page, they can easily understand what the project is about, a detailed
Yeah,
information of what the project is about, and also on user stories. When you have on your user stories, you have your description, you have discussion, you have so many things there, and you also have a particular part of it in that user story where you can explain, because me, I think this is very important, that you can explain a step-by-step process. Like, okay, let me say for instance, I want to build a form cons- related to a business requirement that needs JavaScript. With giving a detailed information of how I implemented each and every part of it is very, very important. Even though I'm not a developer or I don't have any knowledge, let me say, I don't have any knowledge about what is happening. If I read your user story, if I read your implementation, I'll be able to understand that, okay, this is what happened here. You understand? Even somebody that is new, that maybe the person is joining the project, the person will have an information of what happened. Yeah. So
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. Documentation is really, really important. But what you got to remember is that the user story is something that is used for many different purposes. So,
okay.
as an example, somebody from your quality assurance team, your testers, will
Yeah.
be using the acceptance criteria in the user story to
Yeah.
assess whether a piece of functionality is working as expected or not. So,
Yes.
from their perspective, they don't really care about the technical implementation detail.
Yeah.
They just want to understand, is it doing what it's supposed to? Is it
Yes.
meeting these essential criteria? And it really comes down to what level of detail you include in terms of documentation and where you include it. And
Okay.
and the other thing to remember is it is a low code platform, so
Yeah. It is.
it's not always necessary to document every minute detail.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll be spending more time documenting than you will be building. And let's
Yeah.
let's face it, not, we're developers. We don't really enjoy documentation either.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, the point is, document where there's a need to document. Don't
Okay.
document just for the sake of it. So, if you've got a particular complex technical design for
Yeah.
which there is value in documenting it, then absolutely, spend a good amount of time documenting properly. Make sure that document goes through, a level of reviews with your solution
Yeah.
architects, etc. But if it's just a simple case of, I'm building this table with a
Yeah.
bunch of columns on the form,
Yeah.
and these are the mandatory columns, and
Yeah.
there's this bit of conditional logic on it. Maybe you don't need a separate document for it. Maybe you can just
Okay.
explain it in terms of acceptance criteria in the user story, and that
Yeah.
way is
Acceptance
also
criteria.
beneficial to your testers. So
Yeah.
I think applying a bit of common sense goes a long way.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. And we have a question, and I love DevOps pipeline as well, but I'm not sure they are the best for personal productivity or small deployments owned from someone from the business. It's perfect for business critical applications built by or owned by IT or dev people.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just saying his opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with that viewpoint. If it's a fairly simple or a small implementation with only a few users, it doesn't make sense to implement a
Yeah.
huge amount of time in
Yeah.
implementing an ALM strategy. But on the converse, if there's a large enterprise scale application with a large number of users, then it does justify it.
Yeah.
But what I will also add to that is once you've implemented the ALM strategy a few times, it really becomes quite quick to
Yeah.
set it up for futures because it just becomes second nature. You get into the habit, you understand what's going on, you know what the common mistakes are, and you don't make those
Yeah.
mistakes often. So
Yeah.
it's sometimes you have to kind of just weigh up the benefits.
Yeah. And I have another question to ask you. What are the common errors one can avoid while deploying, like on deployment basis?
Yeah, I think one of the main thing that trips most people up, even including me, by the way, is dependencies.
Yeah,
If
sure.
you don't carefully manage your dependencies and your solutions, then that's going to cause deployment failures. In fact, I had one
Yeah.
of these deployment failures earlier today in
Yeah.
before my client. But that dependency came from a slightly different reason. It was because of the installation of a Microsoft first-party app,
Yeah.
and it was installed in our dev environment, but not in our non-development environments. Well, not all of them. So, in some
Yeah.
environments, it caused some deployment failures. So, you need to carefully manage those sorts of dependencies as well, and not just the dependencies that you cause by your own customization.
Yeah. Okay. That's nice. I'm just going to check the comments if you have any question. So I usually use Adobe Wikis for doing some high level documentations and key decisions. Okay, that's amazing. I think that's the first time I'm hearing of Ados. Yeah,
ADO, I think that they're referring to Azure DevOps wikis, but yeah, I think that's a really nice tool as well.
yeah,
You just need to, I guess, think about who your target audience is for the documentation and whether they'd be able to view it there, whether it makes sense there or not. I've worked with organizations who have different places for different
yeah,
types of documentation. Some have the documentation in Confluence, some have it in wikis, some
yeah,
have it in SharePoint libraries. So yeah, pick
yeah,
the right tool that works for you and for the target audience and the organization.
yeah. I have another question to ask you, and we're about to end this podcast. So if you have any questions, please just pop it on the chat. I have a question to ask you, like what's someone who is just trying to get started with deployments or trying to get started with ALM. So where do you think they can get started? Yeah.
So there's a bunch of there's a whole host of documents and YouTube videos that people have put together. So I definitely recommend checking those out.
Yeah.
There's some superstars in the community as well who are
Yeah.
really specialists in this area. And while Hamzi is the one I'm really referring to here, he's the one who's the pioneer around the Power DevOps tools for Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
He's got a bunch of documentation, and a lot of his tools are also open source, so you can
Okay.
go in and look at the GitHub repository, how he's built
Okay.
it to really understand it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm the sort of person who learns by doing and getting into the
Yeah.
actual details.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
that's how I get productive with the stuff I do. So I'm forever looking at people's code in GitHub, trying to understand how it works and stuff. So
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend the same approach.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And if you are listening to this podcast, I think we do not have any other question. Yep, we do not have any other question. So don't forget to subscribe and follow everywhere. We are going to be having a lot of episodes, a lot of podcast episodes this month. So just subscribe and turn on the notification. Yeah. So thank you. And
Thank you,
Parvez,
Rachel.
yeah, thank you. Do you have any advice for us? Yeah, learning
Uh,
advice,
I
career advice. Yeah,
I would say get stuck in, create your developer tenant, and get
yeah,
stuck in, get hands on. Think of real scenarios that you'd like to solve using Power Platform. You can even set up your a free Azure DevOps tenant as well, so
yeah,
you can install all the extensions in there you want. Even get started using ALM. Try
yeah,
to get your customizations and your solutions under source control, get your automatic build going, get your deployments going, and then
yeah,
start to do the more advanced stuff like quality control and automatic execution of tests and that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
yeah, best way to learn, get stuck in.
yeah, yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Parvez. So
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
yeah, thank you. Okay, bye, everyone. See you in the next
Cheers.
podcast.
Take care. Bye now.
Yeah.